Right. How many were on the presentation in January of the OWL presentation? Just raise your hand. Okay, quite a few. All right. Well, I think you will enjoy tonight's presentation as well. Um, we had a little difficulty in December getting it on to go, but uh, Pico let us down,
Yeah.
or I guess it was Pico.
Yeah, it was.
In any event, I'd like to introduce Vince Smith. Uh, Vince is an employee with the Montgomery County Public Health Department, uh, but his avocation, which takes up a lot of his time, is his interest in birds. Uh, Vince is currently the president of the Valley Forge Audubon Society, but he began his career as a naturalist and environmental educator at the Green Lane Reservoir Park. On or about 1988, 1990, he became interested in birds and started to volunteer at Valley Forge, particularly helping with or assisting with local bird counts. That initial foray into birds has led him all over, really, his interest in birds. Um, and he has presented many talks to many Audubon Society and other nature interest groups in our region. Uh, in 2000, Vince became the president of the Valley Forge Audubon Society and has since served 2 terms in that position. And we intend to keep him in that position so he does it right. He does a fabulous job. He has a good board in support of him, and we're delighted that he's back again with us tonight, looking at the topic of Hawk ID for beginners and others. So, Vince, it's yours.
Thank
I
you.
would just like to say one thing. Would everybody else please mute themselves so that we don't have any outside noises?
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Wilbur, and thank you everybody for the invite. And with that, I am going to share my screen and let's, how does that look? Does it look good?
Yeah.
Looks
Okay.
good.
Okay, let me just shrink this down. Okay. So again, thank you so much for the invite. Hopefully this time around, we're going to be able to get through without a power outage. I did want to make one little check at anybody who attended the OWL program. If I had mentioned that the male and the female owls, the larger one is the female and the smaller one is the male. And if I had mentioned that the female has a deeper voice, it turns out somebody has done a little bit more research on that topic. And it turns out that great horned owls, the male has a deeper voice, even though he is smaller in stature. It turns out his voice box is larger and therefore he is able to have a deeper voice. So I stand corrected, and fortunately somebody was able to point that out to me, and I appreciate that. But tonight we're going to talk about hawks, and I mean, hawks are just a wonderful topic to talk about, and we're getting ready for the migration. So this is a good time to actually do this presentation. So let's get on to our first slide here, and let me just see here. There we go. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to just talk about some general resources that you can use. These are resources that I have found useful when it comes to identifying hawks. We're going to talk a little bit about the migration overview. And as I mentioned, March is actually the start of the main hawk migration. It's a little bit different in the spring than it is in the fall. And then we're going to talk about some local areas where you can do some hawk watching, and these are hawk watch stations. And typically they're manned by people who are trying to capture the numbers as they're moving back and forth in their migration periods. And then we're going to talk about some different types of hawks and raptors, and then we're going to take a look at some steps that you can take to identify hawks based on size, shape, color patterns, and also flight patterns. And these are just some of the characteristics that people who are on the hawk stations are going to use when they're trying to figure out, what is that hawk coming towards me? Is that a red-tailed hawk? Is it a falcon? Or is it a harrier, northern harrier? So we'll talk about some of the little tricks you can use. Some of the resources, I highly recommend Hawks in Flight, David Sibley, Pete Dunn, and Clay Sutton. It's a wonderful resource. Anything done by David Sibley, I just find his drawings to be so lifelike. And as a matter of fact, we are going to be using some of his illustrations on this presentation. And part of the reason I really like his stuff is because he really captures the spirit of the bird. So the bird might be, a quick, dirty sketch of the species, but it really captures the shape and the feel as it's gliding through the air. So I highly recommend anything from that David Sibley does, but Pete Dunn does a wonderful description in Clay Sutton. It's a great book. Hawks of North America, that's from the Peterson Guides. And then there's the Hawk Watch, which is a guide for beginners. And then again, that was Pete Dunn with illustrations by David Sibley. And that particular book was 1984, and I think it was his first publication. He was a young man at the time, but he just did a wonderful job. And as a matter of fact, I heard it said that Roger Tory Peterson saw it and also was in contact with him at Cape May and knew that basically David Sibley was going to kind of take over in the tradition of Roger Tory Peterson. So let's go to our next slide here. The fall migration, and we had it ready for the last class, and that's why we put the fall migration first. And unfortunately, I couldn't switch the slides. I would have preferred to do that. But the fall migration, if we take a look, this is from Hawk Mountain. And you'll notice that in the fall migration, beginning in September, the birds are starting to move. And usually when it comes to mid-October or so, they're pretty well moving through mid-November. They're pretty well through at that time period. And you have these odd little bands in here, like for example, the ospreys, you can see they're starting their migration earlier and they're finishing earlier. And then you have a species like a broadwing hawk. And the broadwing hawks, you'll notice that there's this high congestion in September, October. And all these birds are actually going to winter in Central America and South America. So they're kind of looking to get out of this area as quickly as possible. And the reason is that they feed on reptiles and amphibians, a lot of reptiles and amphibians. And if you're doing reptiles and amphibians as your primary food source, you're going to be going to locations where there are reptiles and amphibians. And in the wintertime, we don't have reptiles and amphibians. They're all in hibernation. So therefore, that's why you see that strange little bell there. So if I go to the next slide here, and that's just the list for the fall migration. If I go to the next slide, this is the spring migration. And one of the things you'll notice with the spring migration is, and again, this is from Hawk Mountain, you'll see right here in the middle of March, everybody is really starting to move. The exception is the golden eagles. They're actually have already taken like late February into March. They're moving a lot earlier, and the rough-leg hawks, they're also moving a little bit earlier. But generally, you'll see this time period between mid-March through till June, we have all these birds that are moving. And basically, the difference is that when they're going south in the fall, they're typically looking to catch the wind on their back and get out of town. And usually that's because the conditions are changing up north. Well, in the springtime, they're kind of waiting for the conditions to become right. And they're waiting for a breeze or a wind that's coming from the south, either the southeast or the southwest, so they can just ride that wave of wind as they're trying to get to their location. So that's why in the springtime we have this different pattern. They're not nearly as rushed to get out of town. They're more like, let's be patient about it and make sure the conditions are right. Let's not go up too soon, and that way we can get there at the right time. So that's just a little bit of difference in the fall versus the spring migration. As I said, this is a great time to get out to take a look for the hawks in migration. And then the other thing too is if you do go to the hawk stations, there will be people counting up there at this time of year, but it's not nearly as many as you see in the fall. And the reason is because the fall is a lot more congested, so there's a lot more chances to view all these hawks as they're condensing. But in the springtime, it's much more individual as they're heading up. Some of the hawk watch stations you can go to. Of course, the classic is Hawk Mountain. And this originally, Hawk Mountain was a location where people shot hawks, and it was turned into a sanctuary. And now it's the premiere of and the start of watching hawks from a station and counting the species to see which species are moving and when. There's Fort Washington State Park that is in north central. It's kind of like central Montgomery County. If you're closer down to Delaware County, there's Rose Tree Park. If you're in Berks County, there's Bake Oven Knob. Actually, that might be Bake Oven Knob might be in Lehigh. That might be in Lehigh County. But then there's Bucktoe Preserve, which is in Avondale, and then there's Cape May Point State Park, and then Cape Henlopen. All of these are great locations if you want to go and see the hawks. And you don't have the same filtering mechanism that takes place in the springtime as compared to the fall period. And I mentioned for those who came to the first presentation, in the fall, Cape May is such a unique spot for hawks because basically the birds are flying south and they're coming from maybe Quebec in that region, and they're following along the coast in fall, and they have their eye on the bay and the shoreline, and all of a sudden they get down to the Cape May Point and they're like, oh, wait a second, we have to now cross the Delaware Bay. So a lot of them pull up and they say, wait a second, I don't know if I can make that. And some of them will actually reverse migrate. They actually fly north, back up the bay, and then cross over somewhere maybe in Pennsylvania or over in Delaware, and then they go on down. But that's why Cape May is very, very special in the fall. In the springtime, we don't have that same concentration. It's a different mechanism, and they're actually coming in more from the continent. So sometimes they get blown over into Jersey, but it's not going to be the same pattern. And that's just the difference between the winds in the spring and the fall migration, and also when the birds are deciding to move. Okay, this is the little system that I use when it comes to identifying hawks. I first just take a look at the bird, and first get a gander at it. Is it a large, dark, soaring bird? And that's just the first thing I look at. And we also have a category of hawks we call buteos. And you'll notice here with the buteo, if you measure from wingtip to wingtip, you'll notice that is a lot longer than if we were to measure from head to tail. And because those wings are so long, the tail looks kind of short on a buteo. And that is because buteos are masters of soaring. They're able to catch the thermals and catch the winds, and they're able to scan up there for prey or to see where the other species are. And that you'll notice when you just take a look at that bird, do you have that pattern where the wings are wingtip to wingtip is really long and the head to tail is shorter than that. Next, we have the category of raptors we call accipiters. And accipiters, if we were to measure wingtip to wingtip, head to tail, you'll notice that it's a lot closer. It's not quite the same distance. It's not equally, but there's a T pattern that you see on an accipiter when it's in flight. And that's because because its tail sticks out a lot longer. And there is a reason for that. These are birds that are hunting other birds, and these are the ones that will attack smaller birds in a thicket. And because they're doing that and they're gliding themselves through the woods, that longer tail allows them to maneuver through all those twigs and branches. And there's an amazing video that was shot of a goshawk running through a crowded woodlot. And if you ever take a look at it, it's just a wonderful thing. And this is a goshawk that we're not going to talk about them, but they're large accipiters, but they have the capacity to run through a tangled mess of wood. And the reason is that longer tail gives them a maneuverability to be able to angle themselves through all those branches. And it's really impressive to watch them do that. The next category we're going to talk about is the falcons. And you'll notice on the falcons, wingtip to wingtip, it's a very long length. And then the head to tail is short. So if we were to compare those two, it's probably close to half the distance of the wings. But you'll notice on a falcon, you have these very sharp wings and it points at all angles. And the reason is that these are birds of open space and they are fast and they are in hot pursuit of prey. And that's why they like all that open space in order to be able to hunt. Okay, if you're looking at these broad categories, here's a little schematic of, okay, we have our falcons, we have the pointy wings, a little bit more of a mist, grasp the wind in such a way it's just like a straight line in comparison to that turkey vulture, which is dangling across the winds, or I should say the thermals. So the adult bird is what we see here. Oh, I missed that up. Let's go back. Okay, the adult bird is here on the left, and the juvenile is on the right. And you'll notice with the juvenile bird, you're going to see this kind of pattern of white blotchiness. And the white blotchiness can be in the secondaries here. It can be in this portion of the bird, which we call its arm, the portion of its wing. But it's blotchy. It's very different from some of the other species that we're going to compare, which is going to be the golden eagle. And somebody had a question as to whether or not we'll make that comparison. And we will show you how to tell that difference. So when you think of a juvenile bald eagle, think of that white blotchiness on a juvenile. The other thing to notice on a bald eagle is look at how far the neck and the head and the shoulders project from those wings. It just really hangs out. And then you throw into that, they have a massive bill. And it really makes it even seem like it's a bigger head than you would expect. And of course, this is the classic. Here's an adult bald eagle in flight. This is one perched. And in terms of their life cycle, a couple interesting things. They're typically associated with bodies of water. They'll eat rotted fish. They'll eat dead animals. White-tailed deer carcasses are wonderful for them. But they will tend to associate near bodies of water. That's their preferred. And it could be along the sea, but it could also be inland along a river or a stream. People think of them as being lazy carrion eaters, which they are, but they are also very successful hunters. They have the capacity to be able to swoop down and grab ducks and coots from the top of the water. And they can actually grab ducks in flight. They can just get the angle just right and grab that duck as it's passing through. So they're not just slackers. They will harass ospreys, and I have seen them do that. So you can read that in the natural history books. That it's actually a very common occurrence. They are a major success at this point, thanks to the Endangered Species Act. They nest along almost every body of water in southeastern Pennsylvania at this point. And I suspect that our concentration of bald eagles in the winter season goes up significantly because we don't freeze anymore. So there's plenty of access to the water, and there's a tendency for the youngsters and birds from further north to concentrate along our non-ice-bound waterways. Just a really great success story. And of course, here's another picture. Here's a juvenile perched, and then see these white blotchiness you see on this juvenile here. And typically it takes 4 years for a bald eagle to go from the juvenile to an adult. And it will be a gradual process to the point where the 3rd year, you will start to see a lot more white on the tail and on the head. And usually about that year, the 4 years is usually when they start their breed. An odd fact about bald eagles is sometimes the populations that we see in the summertime may be juvenile birds that are coming from Florida. There's actually a Florida subpopulation of bald eagles. And it's a subpopulation because it's actually adaptive to a local malaria that's down there. And then they'll start nesting in the middle of the wintertime because there's food available there in Florida. And then they head north after they finish fledging in March or April. And they're just going to continue north. And then they eventually settle back down and they're going to breed down in Florida. Now here's the golden eagle. You'll notice it's an all dark bird, but you don't see any of the white splotchiness that you see on the bald eagle. And the juvenile is really key because the juvenile has a tendency to have these white patterns here, these white feathers right here on the edge of the secondaries and the primaries. These are the primaries, the flight feathers, and then these are the secondaries. And there's right at the edge of the primaries, they have these white feathers as well as the tail. Look at the tail, you have this distinct white band. So if you do see a dark looking bird that looks like a bald eagle, you might want to double check and make sure it's not going to be a golden eagle. And again, you're going to see in this pattern as compared to that, which is that general just blotchiness. Different habitats for golden eagles. These are birds of open space, mountains. They have attempted to nest in Pennsylvania at the turn of the century, and they used to nest in upstate New York. And part of the theory behind that was that, you know, at one time Pennsylvania was just completely annihilated of timber, even in the upper mountains, and basically it became almost like grasslands up there. And they attempted to nest in those high Appalachian regions at the turn of the centuries. They don't do that anymore. The populations that we see in this area are coming from northeastern Quebec. There's a small relic population over there, and then they come down into the southeast in their migration. Okay, next we're going to talk about is the turkey vulture. Turkey vultures are classic soaring birds, and we have a term which we use. It's called a dihedral, and the dihedral is that V pattern. When you were a kid, you used to make that V pattern to show seagulls when you were doing a painting or something like that. And turkey vultures are classic for that, and they have that ability to be able to grab every drop of wind or thermal that's out there. And one of the tricks you can use to identify the turkey vulture is you'll look at the primaries and the secondaries. If they're backlit in any way, they're going to show up so much paler than the body of the bird and the forewing of the bird. And then here is the picture of the bird in glide position. And typically, look at the tail too. You want to take a look at that tail. These are carrion feeders. You know, one of the interesting things about turkey vultures, if you do approach a nest, both the young and the adults will regurgitate on you. And of course, they're regurgitating stuff that is not exactly appetizing. So you tend to stay away from them if you're getting too close to the nest. And they will hiss like crazy. They will hiss absolutely like crazy. And they are also in migration. They are in migration. We have populations that are here all year long. Birds from further north migrate further south, and then you could have a mix of both within Pennsylvania. Here is the picture of the turkey vulture in the perch position. We have this red head, a bare head, as well as very long wings, very, very long wings that are folded back. As a matter of fact, you'll notice that the fold back beyond the tail. And one of the tricks I use, if you have a beautiful backlit turkey vulture like this picture here, is always reminds me of a longhorn cattle. we have this pattern right here, the dark part of the body versus these backlit primaries and secondaries. And again, you get that classic V pattern. By the way, I forgot to mention, when you do see a golden eagle, they can show a pretty heavy dihedral, that V pattern, not to the extent of a turkey vulture. The next one we want to talk about is the black vultures. And black vultures are new to our area. As a matter of fact, I didn't see my first black vulture until about 1985, and they have become very, very successful. This was traditionally a more southern species, and thanks to maybe global warming as well as all the roadkill deer that we have in this area, they are very, very successful in our region. And one of the things you'll notice again, the pattern of the black vulture, you have these white gloves at the tip. That's a, these primary feathers look like white gloves off of this black body. And the other thing you'll notice on the black vulture is short tail. The legs barely even come down to the tail. And these birds will never soar with the dihedral you see with the turkey vulture. No V pattern, very flat. And they're horrible soarers unless they have great thermals or high wind. If they have great thermals or high wind, they're very successful. But if they don't have that, you will see that they look like they're going to fall out of the sky. So typically it's going to be flat, 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 soar, flat, 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 soar, trying to catch a thermal. These guys are a little bit more aggressive than the turkey vultures. They will kill young lambs and young calves. So they can be a bit of a problem when it comes to livestock. And then here's a classic photo of a pair of black vultures. Again, you'll notice the face is black. It's not red like you saw in the turkey vulture. And then here is the classic soar position of a black vulture with those white primary feathers. Next, we're going to talk about the osprey. And the osprey, if you take a look at the wings have white and dark, but it's primarily a dark pattern on the wings. But then if you look at the body portion, as well as these underwings portion here, is all white. And the thing I always look for if I'm trying to figure out if I have an osprey is they remind me more of a seagull than all the other raptors. They have more of an M pattern to them than sun. You'll see them drop down pretty deep. Majority of these birds are going to get out of here and they're actually going to head further south. And in most instances, they're going to head all the way to Venezuela or Colombia in the wintertime. And the youngsters actually stay down there and then they come back as adults. And they are not surprisingly, they haven't nested in this southeastern region as well as the bald eagles. We expected these guys to start sooner, but it turned out the bald eagles were more successful. Okay, next is we're going to talk about the cat area. So we went through the large dark soaring birds. Next, we're going to talk about the buteos. And again, buteos wingtip to wingtip versus head to tail, longer wings than head to tail. And the first one we're going to talk about is the most common that we're going to see in this area. And this is the red-tailed hawk. Red-tailed hawks are birds of open space, edges, as well as they look a little bit of forest in the back and then fields or edges. And that is because they have the most variety of the diets of all the raptors, primarily rabbits. They'll take they will occasionally take birds like pheasants and things like that. They're not really going to dabble into too many small birds. Usually a pheasant or a chicken is about the size of that, but they have a much more of a variety of a diet. And also more of a variety of a habitat. So basically human beings and the way we develop it really is kind of more conducive to red tails than a lot of the other raptors we're going to talk about. One of the things you're going to look for a red-tailed hawk is you can look for the belly band. This is not an absolute, but it is a pretty good sign. You have a belly band on both of these birds. In this particular case, we have the adult here on the left and we have a juvenile on the right. But here's the real trick on a soar position. If you see the bird in the soar position, these little marks here on the underwing are always dark, whether it's a juvenile or it's an adult bird. So if you have the bird soaring up ahead, look for this little mark here if you don't get an orange tail. And the reason for that is because the juveniles don't have an orange tail until they're ready to breed. So you're going to look for the belly band. You're also going to look for this mark here. This is a petiole mark. It's this little forewing right here along this edge. It's always dark on a red tail. On the left, we have two birds in flight. We have an adult red tail on the left, and here we have a juvenile red tail on the right. We have the belly band. We have these dark marks here along the forewing right here. And that's a classic. You can see the tail's not red. It's got little fine bands on the whitish tail. A little bit of a heads up regarding these guys. Red tails do come in dark morphs, not usually in our area. It's a little bit more common towards the west. But just so you're aware, if you're out into the West Coast, you might actually get to see some of these birds. This one has a red tail, but the body's dark. This is the classic of Harlan's. This is actually from the Pacific Northwest, and you can barely see, there's a little bit of rusting here, but for the most part, this is a very, very dark bird. I've actually never seen one of these. I have seen some of the other dark morphs and some of the other Buteos we'll talk about, but this one is typically going to be in Washington State, Alaska, and places like that. The next bird we're going to talk about is a Buteo, the red-shouldered hawk. And this is the one I was mentioning early in the group that for some reason this season we've had the highest concentration in the wintertime that I've ever seen. These are really, really pretty Buteos. Classic thing you can look for, first of all, the breast here can be streaky. Breast is streaky. It doesn't have the belly band. The clue I look for, and you'll notice the tail, it has wider bands than our red tail on a juvenile. And then look how wide the bands are on the adult bird. But one of the things you can look for when it comes to a red shoulder hawk are these white commas, which are offset by these black wings. And it really stands out because of that black off of white. And especially if the bird is soaring and backlit, it's really going to stand out. You put your binoculars up and you see these white commas. Red tails can have sort of white commas, but they're not going to be to the extent that you see right here. And of course, the adult bird still has a little bit of that sense of the white comma at the tip offset by the black. And then the belly portion of the red shoulder hawk portion here is all rusty. And part of the reason for that is it has a little bit more of a concentration of its diet on things such as reptiles and amphibians. By broadwings in soar is if you take a look at this dark outline completely surrounding the whole wing as well as the tail. And you'll notice that whether it's an adult or it's a juvenile, it's almost as if when I was a kid, we used to do coloring books. And in order to make the image pop out a little bit more, what you would do is take a black crayon and you would outline the whole outside of the birds so that basically the image would pop out a little bit more. And I always think of broadwings as being that, these line that kind of paints the outside of the wings as well as the tail. And you'll notice that both on the juvenile here as well as the adults. Excuse me, not frog, amphibians and reptiles. They're going to eat primarily reptiles and amphibians. So that's why they tend to associate more in those locations. A little bit deep, dark woods is usually where they're going to associate. And then here's an image of the broadwing in flight. You can see how there's that black outline all the way through the bird. And then here is the bird in a perched position too. And the classic that everybody shows is the length of that tail. Look, another little trick sometimes people use is how much white you can see on the tip of the tail. It's a little bit more extensive on a Cooper's hawk than a sharp-shinned hawk. But also look at how far the neck projects out from the wing on this particular bird. It's a lot bigger headed. Some people describe them as a bowling pin perched in the tree, which is a good indicator. You can see, look at the breast here. We have these, it almost like somebody took fine brown streaks and just kind of doppled it onto a white breast. Here's another picture of a Cooper's hawk in flight. Again, fine streaks. Okay, we're going to compare that to the sharpshin hawk. And the first thing you'll notice, and again, the thing that gets tricky is there's the size difference between a juvenile, excuse me, an adult male sharpshin hawk and a, an adult female sharpshin hawk and a male Cooper's hawk in the field. It can get really, really confusing. So one of the tricks you can use to tell the difference is, again, looking at this front portion of the bird. Can you see how there's this little, more of a bend or a C pattern that you see? And it makes the bird look like it has a smaller head in comparison to the Cooper's hawk we looked at. And then the other thing you take a look at is you can notice that it's a lot darker streaked or spotty on the breast pattern. It's just very different from the Cooper's hawk. And then on the adult bird, we're going to have these horizontal brown bands. And if you do get the classic pose, you're going to see when the tail gets folded, it's not rounded, it's teed off, and it frequently has this little notch in it just because of the way the tail feathers sit. Now, Cooper's hawks are feeding on small birds, and so are these sharpshin hawks. And again, getting back to that tail, that is what allows them that maneuverability to go through the tangled mess and to grab that small bird. Okay, here's the streaks. Look how much more and heavier the streaks are on the sharpshin hawk. And then you can see here, this is a bird that's transitioning to an adult. It's getting a little bit further on. It's starting to show a little bit more of the horizontal pattern there. But these are, and then here you can actually see that little notch when the bird is in flight. Another thing some people use is if you take a look at in a perch bird, it sometimes gets tricky. You can take a look at the legs. If the legs look like they are pencils, then chances are you're looking at a sharpshin hawk. If they look like pretzel rods, then you're looking at possibly a Cooper's hawk. And then getting to show the comparison between the two. Again, in flight, it's hard to see the actual physical difference, and there is a close proximity to size between an adult male Cooper's hawk and an adult female sharpshin hawk. And the reason for that is, I forgot to mention this earlier, for all raptors, the females are 20% bigger than the males. They're significantly bigger. The theory as to why that is the case is because some people think it's because the females do most of the incubation, so therefore they're better able to incubate. And then other people mention that it might have to do with if the male is killed off, the female being larger size might be able to tackle larger prey and then therefore not have to work as hard. That's just some theories as to why that might be the case. But all raptors, 20% bigger. The girls are 20% bigger than the boys. The next species we're going to talk about is the northern harrier. This is one of my favorites. The males are significantly smaller than the females. The pattern underneath is white with these black tip wings. And we'll see a photo. The top portion is this beautiful steel gray. It's almost like a blue gray on the male. These are birds of grasslands and open space. And a little bit different from some of our other hawks. Most of the hawks are going to perch and then chase after food. In the case of a northern harrier, they actually scan the field for their prey. And they'll actually fly with a very strong dihedral, almost like as sharp a dihedral as our turkey vulture. You can also take a look at the length of the wings. These guys have very long wings, but they also have a very long tail. So I always describe the northern harrier as in some ways like a cross between, if you took a buteo and threw on a scipitar tail on it, because it has a very, very long tail. And they're primarily feeding on meadow voles and things like that in the fields. They do associate mostly to wetlands. That's why the old name was called marsh hawk, because that's where they used to spend a lot of time, and they still do. But they will hang out in grassland fields. Here's a picture of an adult male. You can see this blue-gray color tone. And then the classic for any Harrier is you see this white rump patch. Both the male and the female are going to have this little white rump patch. And the other thing I wanted to mention is if you take a look at the face of the Northern Harrier, it's almost like a radar dish. And because it's a radar dish, if you attended our OWL program, you'll notice that they have a similar type of feature on the Harrier. And the reason is that they're doing the same thing the owls are doing. They're capturing that sound in their ears. And it turns out that Harriers will actually hunt at the beginning, even before sunrise, and also after sunset is typically that time period. So that's the male. And then here's the female. Here's the female. And she's brownish in tone with these beautiful bands. But again, she has this white rump patch right here in the back. A little bit of a warning when it comes to especially accipiters. There's a certain perpendicular to you. Horizontal to you, if it's horizontal to you. Because at certain angles, I've been tricked. I thought I had a Harrier, and I was like, wait a second, no, that was actually hunting pigeons. I always have a classic story. I went to a Phillies game, and there was a juvenile red-tailed hawk on the scoreboard, and it's perched up there screaming away. And then all of a sudden it leaves, and all of a sudden perches right next to where it was at was a peregrine falcon. They do very well in the cities. One of the things you can look for are these Elvis sideburns that come on down. The fastest flying animal in the world has been clocked at stoops over 200 miles an hour. It can hit its prey and just basically it's a puff of feathers. And if you ever get a chance to watch them down in Cape May in the fall chasing shorebirds, you'll never forget it. It's like nothing I've ever seen before to see them chase after shorebirds. Just an amazing bird to watch. Kind of interesting when they are in migration, they will they'll actually just continue to feed on the wings. So they'll actually have food in their talons and they'll just bend down and grab a chunk and just keep flying. And I've actually seen them fly into winds of 60 miles an hour in the Delaware Bay and cut through it like it's nothing. They're just an amazing bird to watch. Here's a picture of the bird in a perch position, and then here's a classic pose of the bird in flight. It's just a really pretty bird. This is the bird that the falconers like to use. Look at that great wishbone that this bird's eating. The next bird we're going to talk about is the merlin. The merlin, I always think about it as the mini peregrine falcon, very dark with white spots. And it's about the size of a kestrel, but it's broader and a little bit thicker. And this is a bird that's feeding on small songbirds, a lot of shorebirds, but it also feeds on dragonflies. And typically they're going to nest further north of here. They're going to nest further north into like Maine, all the way up into Canada. It does also have that Batman pattern to it in the soar, or I should say in glide position. And then this is what it looks like in the soar position. Very dark, very dark with white spots. Great place to see these are down in Cape May, New Jersey in the fall. I remember Pete Dunn used to have a statement about merlins. They have two speeds. They have fast and stop, and it's very true. They're either perched still or they are moving really fast as they scatter over the open fields. And again, this is like a peregrine, open space. Open space is what they like. Okay, here's a picture of a bird in the perch, and then here is a picture of the bird in flight. You can see those, again, dark wings with white spots. And then here's an adult bird in the perch position. Okay, our next species we're going to talk about is the American kestrel. This is again another falcon, pointy wings, a little bit daintier than our merlin. And you'll notice that in my mind, it looks like this is a white wing with dark spots on it as compared to that merlin we looked about. Most of it is pale with the dark spots. If it's an adult male, it's going to have a rusty tail here. What you'll notice is these are just like the other falcons. These are birds of open space, so it's open fields. You will notice that they'll flutter fade above the field. So they'll actually hang above the fields and then drop down for their prey. They do eat birds, mostly mammals and insects, an awful lot of insects, especially dragonflies. Yeah, they're just really cool. And if a wind is blowing and a falcon is kind of getting knocked around a little bit, chances are it's an American kestrel. One of the things that's also kind of interesting, since they do feed on meadow voles, they do see in ultraviolet light, which means they can pick up they can see ultraviolet lighting, so they can actually pick up the what's called fluorescence of a mouse dropping or a mouse urine. So basically they can track a meadow vole based on its urine stains, which is pretty wild that they can do that. It's like shining a black light into an area of a crime scene. It glows in the dark to them. Okay, here's a classic picture of a American kestrel with a dragonfly in its wings eating away. You have these two marks on the face here. And then this is a classic male pose with this blue wing and the blue cap. The female is going to be more rusty. Okay. And I think this might be my last slide. And I forgot to mention at the beginning, I do have a quiz. So I should have mentioned everybody if they have pen and paper, but we're going to go through them all anyway. Okay, we're going to show the first quiz bird here. Very long wings, got a white head, white tail. Give everybody a couple seconds. This is the bald eagle. Okay, the next bird we're going to look at, you're going to have to figure out if this is an accipiter or if it's a buteo. We know it's not going to be one of those large, dark soaring birds. Okay, and if we take a look at head to tail versus wingtip to wingtip, it has a belly band. It also has these little dark marks here on the front edge. This is a juvenile red-tailed hawk. We have a dark bird with lots of blotchy white spots on the underwing. Very large head projection. This is going to be a juvenile bald eagle. Okay, in this particular case, we have these black and white bands on the tail. We have this rusting pattern on the underwings as well as the body. You have the little bit of an offset of some commas here. This is good. We notice that it's a buteo, wingtip to wingtip versus head to tail. This is going to be an adult red shoulder hawk. Okay, we're going to take a look at this one next. First of all, we look wingtip to wingtip versus head to tail. That tail is looking pretty long there. We notice that it has streaks on the front here. It does have a little notch on the tail. This turns out to be an accipiter, but the accipiter is actually a Cooper's hawk. This is one of those examples of a Cooper's hawk. He's missing the tail feather right here, so you don't have this rounded edge here on the full tail. But this is a juvenile Cooper's hawk. We have pointy wings, a rusty tail. We have these little two streaks. We have the Elvis sideburn streak, as well as the second mark here. This is going to be a falcon, and it looks like it has white wings with dark spots. So this is an American kestrel. This is probably one of the trickiest ones you're going to see. And part of the reason is that this is a juvenile bird that is looking pretty ratty. He's actually missing a couple of his primary feathers. He's missing a bunch of primary feathers here on this edge right here. You can see right here, we do have what looks like that evidence of a comma, but it kind of stops right about here. But if you look right in here, we have this three feathers in here are dark. 4 feathers in here are kind of dark. These primary edges are dark. These primary edges are dark. We have streaks on the breast, mostly white on the under portion of the wing. This is a juvenile broadwing hawk. Okay, now we have to decide if this is an accipiter or if this is a buteo, and we look at that wingtip to wingtip versus head to tail. Heavy streaks on the breast, heavy streaks, not fine streaks. We have a notch in the tail. We don't have much of a head projection out here. This is a juvenile sharpshin hawk. We have a classic M position in the flight. Looks kind of like a seagull, a white body, white underwings. We have dark wings with white spots. This is an osprey. And this should be our last one. We have very pointy wings, lots of streaks on the breast. We have the Elvis sideburns here. Definitely a bullet on the wing. This is the peregrine falcon, and a juvenile peregrine falcon. So that is our presentation. And with that, I can open it up to questions. I'm going to hit stop share, and we'll see if we can have any questions. See if we do have any questions.
If you have a question, please raise your hand so that Vince knows who is asking the question. Donald, you're muted. You're muted.
So Donald, you're muted. You want to turn your mute off? Oh, there you go. Oh, still can't hear you.
Okay, you were going to, first of all, thank you very much, Vincent. I really appreciated it. You were going to mention the lifespan, and I think you kind of got away from that.
Oh, okay.
What's the lifespan of an eagle and a hawk and so on?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I from my last presentation, I had to kind of look up that information. Typically, the larger the bird, the longer the lifespan. So, for example, bald eagles, they can live in ideal conditions. They can live 20 years. And typically, as you go down, the species, like the smaller hawks, do not live nearly as long. So, for example, I think if you have an American kestrel, it might be average somewhere around 5 years or so, and then a bald eagle is at 20 years. And part of the reason for that has to do with the lifespan is typically connected with how many eggs they lay and how many young they can have. And bald eagles are going to not produce as many youngsters as an American kestrel. American kestrel can lay 4 eggs, and if they successfully raise all those youngsters, that's just great and wonderful. A bald eagle, it's lucky if it raises 2. So that is part of the reason why typically when we talk about the range of an American kestrel to a bald eagle, there's going to be a longer lifespan on a bald eagle and a shorter lifespan as we get a little bit smaller. And then there's another factor that comes into play, and that is the smaller you are, the more likely you are going to be food for a larger bird of prey. Classic example, and this is a suspicion, we've noticed in 1985 that the Cooper's hawks are increasing. Well, it turns out that American kestrels are decreasing. And the suspicion is that American kestrels are consumed by Cooper's hawks. And the same is possibly true for sharpshin hawks. So it might be a situation where they're kind of out competing those in those particular cases. So if we were looking at that range from an American kestrel to a bald eagle, the tendency is you're going to live a little bit longer as you get a little bit bigger.
I just want to mention, thank you very much. I just want to mention that I was fortunate enough to grow up in a little town called Cape May.
Ah, wonderful.
Went to Cape May High School.
That is wonderful place. Any other questions?
Yeah, I have 2 actually. The first one is, I heard a long time ago that the red-tailed hawk can share its nest with an owl. Is that a fallacy, or can that be true?
Yeah, I don't think that one is true. Typically what happens is great horned owls start nesting in January. They have youngsters, they're laying on eggs in February. And they're the first ones to get started, and frequently they will steal red tail nests because great horned owls do not make their own nests. So typically what happens is if there's an available nest and the red tails are not around, the great horned owl is going to go in and basically take it over if it wants to. If it turns out the great horned owl goes to another location, they will come back and nest in that same location, meaning the red tails will definitely come back and nest. But they kind of compete against each other pretty heavily. I always tell the story. Had an experience one time when I was out in the woods and there was all of a sudden crows are screaming like crazy and they fly across the lake, and basically I'm like, what's going on? And they chase up a great horned owl, and there's two of them and they're dive bombing this great horned owl. Well, next thing I know, there's a red tail hawk who comes in and says, I don't like that guy either, because in both instances, great horned owls will steal not only babies off of nests, but they'll steal adults off of nests at night. So basically the red tails and the crows were teaming up to bomb the great horned owl.
Wow.
And it was interesting because at one point the one of the crows decided to really get close and basically hit the top of the head of the great horned owl and flew off. And as it's flying off, the great horned owl gave chase and pulled up at the last minute to try to grab it and just missed grabbing that crow.
Wow. Wow.
So the other question is, what is the enemy of like the Cooper's hawk and the Cooper's hawk or the beauty of the hawks?
Yeah, the hawk.
Yeah.
Well,
What,
typically the bald eagles, they're gonna be the king of the neighborhood. They're pretty aggressive. So typically they're the top on the pecking order, and then we kind of go down in terms of size. I would think that they're basically competing mostly for territory. The advantage that the red tails have is they like a tree, but they like that field. If you're talking about a Cooper's hawk, they tend to be in the woods, mostly in the woods. They like the woods, but that said, they're really adaptive to suburban habitats. And I actually have had them nesting in my neighborhood. And the thing that's really bizarre is you don't know, even though it's in a suburban neighborhood, you don't even know where that Cooper's hawk will be. They will not give a good indication where that nest is. They're very secretive when they're nesting. And to the point where they're
For like 20 minutes, it was just hopping all along the green, picking up worms.
yeah, and they would do that if it was a really soaky rain and the vibrations, then sometimes and it chews up all the fish. It's like, the eagles are just going to concentrate like crazy because why not? And then the big thing to watch down there is to watch them harass each other because they're all want to steal each other's food.
Are there any other questions? Well,
No, but I have another quick story.
Oh, please.
It's not about birds, though. Last week, I heard a noise outside my window, so I looked outside, and this huge rabbit went running right straight in front of me outside the window. Then I saw what I think was, because there's been spotted around this region, and especially in our neighborhood in Robinwood, coyote. So it was about 1:30 in the morning, and it was a very large dog-like creature. It was not a deer. I saw coming and walking towards the pine trees that are right outside my window. And from the left, where the rabbit took off, came a fox.
Wow.
So the coyote, whatever it was, I don't know if it was a dog or a coyote, and I really looked at it hard, but it was nighttime, so it was a little difficult. But there was a lot of snow on the ground, so you could see silhouettes.
Yeah.
And the only thing that I was wondering about is the tail. because generally in all the pictures I've seen of coyotes, the tail is down. It's not up. And I don't know if it was maybe excited, this animal, whatever it was, but the tail was sort of up and curled like a dog's tail sometimes does.
Yeah.
So I wasn't sure if that could be a coyote or not. But the fox came from the left and started walking toward the berm where this coyote or dog had just gone in. And I'm thinking, oh my God, the fox and the coyote are not going to have a fight or whatever. So I'm listening, and all of a sudden the fox goes tearing out. And then the coyote and or dog, whatever it was, went lopping off into the distance across the golf course.
Wow.
It was wild. It was
Wow.
so cool. All happened like within 5 seconds. It was
Wow.
really neat. So I don't know if it was the coyote or not. Do their tails go up in a curled fashion sometimes?
I'm not familiar with their tail going up in a curl fashion.
Yeah, me either. I never saw photos of it, but I saw one that had been taxidermied. My husband and I went antiquing this weekend, and there was a stuffed coyote in an antique shop, and they had the tail in an up position.
Wow.
So I don't know what that was really, so it was strange, but that was exciting at 1:30 in the morning.
That is very exciting.
Just to comment on your story, you probably saw what is called an urban coyote. They are more
Okay.
dog-like, and their tails do go up, and we have seen lots of them
We had them in our old neighborhood.
in Paoli, and I've seen them 3 or 4 times. We live in Yardley, and I've seen them there. And
Oh, you have? Okay.
they go after rabbits, they go after foxes. They really don't have that many enemies. But yeah, and they look like mangy dogs.
Yeah, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, we thought they were dogs at first, but my old college roommate is a zoologist, so after consulting with her, we felt pretty confident that they were urban coyotes. That we had never heard of them before.
Me either.
Yeah, if you look it up on the internet, you'll see, and their tails do go up. And they're
Okay, good.
smaller than the regular coyote.
Okay, yeah, it was definitely, it had long legs, and it was definitely not a fox for
Yeah,
sure.
that was an urban coyote. They're very,
And they usually.
Okay, well, we're really close to Yardley, so if you've seen it there, then it probably was that. That's cool.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
coyotes.
yeah, that's what they are.
Coyotes are very successful. They're found in every county and borough just about in Pennsylvania. They're very, they have been found, even in Philadelphia, more down towards the airport. But they're very successful in this region. You really don't even know they're here, but they're definitely around. And you know, we'll have to see what their relationship with the deer is to see if they at least keep the deer a little honest.
Yeah, but they don't really attack deer. Oh, I guess they could go after a fawn, I guess, right?
Yeah,
They
they supposedly they do a pretty good job on fawns, and I saw one recent study. It was from the southern Appalachia region, in which they do take a little bit more deer than we suspect.
Huh.
But the big thing is, you know, the deer need to be moved a little bit.
Yes, we need to get rid of them.
They need to be kept a little honest. That was one of the big changes when they brought the wolves into Yellowstone. They found that it healed up the landscape along the river riparian zones, because basically the elk and the deer, they didn't hang along the riparian zones because they were at risk. So all of a
Yeah.
sudden it grew back.
Yeah, well, they have no enemies. There
Yeah.
isn't anything that goes after them. So they can just breed and breed and breed, and off they go. Too many of them. I used to think they were really pretty. I don't like them anymore. They eat everything.
Everything.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a full-time job just to get a flower in my yard anymore.
I know, it's crazy.
Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I have one other question. We've been thinking, and this is out to anybody. We've been trying to figure out a good spotting scope. And I didn't know if anybody could recommend one to,
I have a Swarovski. It's fabulous. It's very expensive though.
Yeah, that's a nice scope.
okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, because that's what we've been, because we want to put our iPhone, you can connect your iPhone to the scope and actually get some really good pictures. But
Yeah.
And that's what we've been thinking about doing. The other thing we've been thinking about doing, because we have feeders, we have 2 on our deck and then 1 out, is getting a GoPro and actually mounting it on the deck so that we could take pictures, because we do get a lot of interesting birds back here. And so that was it.
Okay.
Just want to remind everybody that we have some upcoming presentations in the next couple months. Later this month, on the 22nd of March, Monday at 2 p.m., there'll be a presentation on planting with purpose, saving nature at home and beyond. This is part of the, again, Valley Forge Audubon Society group that will be presenting. April, from 7th of April, I'm sorry, the 8th of April, there'll be an Observing the Night Sky at Paces Mill. Dennis O'Leary from Eaton Village will be presenting that. And on Earth Day, April of 21st, the Wednesday, 7 p.m., Dean Russ, the president of the Pennsylvania Bluebird Society, will be presenting on the ecology and management of the eastern bluebird. There are others planned. You'll be getting notices about them. All the information is on our website, on the Hershey's Mill website, so you can keep track of the new presentations or any changes in existing presentations as far as timing, but they're all been pretty well set at this point. So again, Vince, thank you very much.
Just have one other thing, Wilbur.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And unless there are any other
Yeah,
for the good,
I would like to also point out that on the 24th of March, we're going to have a kickoff for the Bluebird monitoring program. So if anybody's interested in that, or even just learning about it, that'll be at 3 o'clock on Wednesday afternoon, the 24th.
for all those who are already monitors and for the 2020 season, we'll be regrouping. Anybody that is new to the group that is interested in getting some direction on monitoring and perhaps being a standby volunteer as we need to assign boxes, you're welcome to attend that session as well to get some information on how we go about the monitoring, how we collect the data, what we do with the data. So again, that's on the 24th of March at 3 p.m. Is that correct?
3 o'clock, yes.
3 o'clock, okay. That's a Zoom presentation. Okay? So
Okay.
again, thank you all for
Okay.
joining us tonight. Have a